Pastor Stephen mentioned a few weeks ago about me possibly being involved in part of a sermon, and he came in this past week and said, "How about you take this point?" And as I began to read it, I thought, I don't know, I'm not very careful with my words sometimes. And there are three things I want to look at this morning just for a couple minutes, things that I think we need to handle or at least be aware of as we deal with love in our relationships. The first is handling anger. Ephesians chapter 4, 26 and 27 says these words, "In your anger do not sin, do not let the sun go down while you're still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold." You know, anger really complicates relationships, doesn't it? And it often comes out in the form of an argument. I will admit to you this morning that I sometimes get angry. Now, if some of you gasp and think, "Oh, our pastor gets angry," I've signed a work agreement. There's only 608 days left in it, so you can take joy in that. The thing that I sometimes get angry with the easiest, and you'd think we would have learned to deal with this by now, is working on projects with my wife. Now, Janelle and I have been married 40 years. We've been together 42 years. And when we work on something together, we just seem to butt heads. And I don't know if it's because she's left-handed and I'm right-handed, left brain, right brain. I don't know if that's it. I don't know if there's part of me that it's just like I'm the man, I need to make the decision. And I don't know if some of it is just the fact that we just look at things so differently. We're going to the same goal. We know what the objective is, but getting there sometimes is really frustrating. We put a couple shelves up in the kitchen just a week ago, and I'll tell you, the goal was 2 shelves level. Not a very hard goal, and to get there, and how we screwed the brackets on, and we did this and that, and it was just amazing. And in that process, I will admit, I became a little frustrated, and oftentimes when that happens, we communicate it in different ways, don't we? That frustration. Some of us are really good at just sitting on it, bearing it, and maybe we don't do anything about us. Some of us are good at possibly gathering ammunition and just plotting our attack. Me, I tell you, it seems like when I get angry, I don't save anything, man. It's just there. I think in the book, Tom Holliday talked about the turtle and the skunk. Man, sometimes when I'm frustrated and angry, I'm a skunk. And oftentimes in that anger, that battlefield almost becomes a competition, doesn't it? Someone has to win. Don't you feel that way? I mean, if I would ask you to admit that, I think all of us would raise our hands. Someone has to win, and what happens is nobody wins, but who? The devil. We give him a foothold when we let anger run amok in our relationships. How do you give the devil a foothold? Well, you let anger run amok. How do you not give the devil a foothold? Don't let the sun go down when you're angry. That's not often easy to do, is it either? Don't let the sun go down when you're angry. That's not advice. That's God's command. And why does he give a command like that? Because he realizes that when you go to bed angry, that just festers and festers. And how easy is it for anger to turn into bitterness? And the minute it hits bitterness, it's much harder and harder to solve. I like the fact that God doesn't say, don't solve the problem. I mean, you can go to bed and agree to disagree. You can meet with another member of your family or a loved one or someone at work and agree to disagree and work at solving the problem later, and that's really what God wants us to do. Will Rogers has an interesting little quote. He says, "Be careful of the words you say, keep them soft and sweet. You never know from day to day which ones you'll have to eat." And there's a poem from Ogden Nash. To keep your marriage brimming with love in a loving cup, whenever you're wrong, admit it. Whenever you're right, shut up. Good words for us as we think about avoiding anger in our relationships. The second thing we want to avoid is gossip. Proverbs 16:28 says, "A gossip separates close friends." I love the ESV translation because they put the word "a whisperer" in there, and I think, boy, that's really a good translation when you think of a gossiper. Now, we probably don't think of gossip as a big deal. We kind of categorize it as a little sin, I think, sometimes. And yet, it's right up there in the list that God puts out with murder and immorality. It's something that really destroys. And you know, the church has an interesting version of gossip sometimes. It's prayer requests. And I think sometimes when we share a prayer request, we don't stop at the fact that Susie needs prayer. We go into all of the gory details about what's going on in Susie's life. And I think it's really easy for us in the church to slip into that. I read once that you shouldn't share anything with someone who's not part of the problem or part of the solution. You know what? I'm supremely confident that our God will answer an unspoken prayer request. And sometimes as we share requests, maybe we need to stop and think a little bit about just how much information we're sharing. You know, I think it's real easy, too, to gossip on social media these days, whether it's a text or a post or an email. It's real easy for us to put something a little extra in sometimes that makes us look a little better and makes the other person look a little worse. I would encourage you as you hit send on your phone, look at that you're going to send. If you sent that to the person that you're texting or writing about, would you feel comfortable with them reading it? If not, it's maybe gossip. Think about that. The third thing we need to think about is being frugal, just saying too much. Words are so dangerous that sometimes just saying too much can get us into trouble. Proverbs 21:23 says, "Watch your words and hold your tongue. You'll save yourself a lot of grief." You know, for me, I often forget that God gave me 2 ears and only 1 mouth. And it's really easy for me I often kiddingly say to people, "Did I say that with my out loud voice?" But there are times for all of us when we say something, and as soon as it's out of our mouth, we say, "Oh, I said that with my out loud voice." It often leaves us looking foolish. Proverbs 17:28 says, "Even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is deemed intelligent." You know, it's easier said than done. But sometimes just stopping from speaking something can be a life-changing decision. You know, I often think of my life, and I wish that God had a little button he could push, and when I'm about to say something foolish, he could zip my lips for me. Think about what you say, and even if it has to be said. Proverbs, as Pastor Steve said, is full of wise words about the benefits of not talking sometimes. Proverbs 10:19 and 20 tells us that not talking so much, we will sin less. And it tells us that the tongue of the righteous is like choice silver. Proverbs 13:3 talks about how talking less preserves your life and we won't come to ruin. And of course, 17:28 will seem more intelligent. I want to take just a second and talk a little bit about this. I don't want you to confuse this with personality, because you know what? Some of us just have a personality that talks more than others. And I really think that God wants you to use the personality that He's given you. And for some of us, that's a lot of words. Tom Holliday mentions, I don't know if it's in his book, but as I was reading a manuscript, he said he's like a jet when it comes to talking. He takes off, gets there as fast as he can, and lands on the dot. Others of us are like helicopters. We take off, hover a little bit, then we go over here and hover, then we hover here, then we land where we're not supposed to land, we take off again. You ask my wife, she gets bored sometimes with my stories because I have all of the details in my stories. She's over by the window in the pickup yawning. You know, when you love somebody and you're interested in a loving relationship with them, you learn to communicate with them based on their personality. You do this by loving people with honest words, by loving people with careful words. Pastor Steve, you have the third one.